said to me, well, the church reached out to me and they said, we want you to meet some of our people. And so I had lunch with this lovely, lovely guy. And we talked, he got to know me, I got to know him, asked him a few questions about the church. And my next door neighbors were are devout Latter-day Saints, the first place I lived when I came here. And they asked me, and I told them, I said, oh, I met somebody who works for your church. Maybe you know him. And they said, oh, well, what's his name? I said, his name is Jeff. And they said, well, Jeff, who's Jeff? And they said, what's his last name? And I was like, Holland, Jeff Holland. Do you know Jeff? He's such a nice guy. And their eyes were like, I know who he is. And I learned very quickly this guy was a big deal and that he is not known as Jeff to them. So
but he's very comfortable with Jeff, really he is.
He's a very humble, great man. So yeah, he's a good guy. I'm sure you know him, but yeah, those apostle gentlemen are smart fellas.
Yeah, Bob, go ahead.
Clifton and Gail, our two Jewish friends, are trying to get on, but they said they couldn't, the link didn't work. And I'm just wondering if there's anything we can do to facilitate that.
I don't know. It should work. It's worked for everybody else. You sure they got the right link? Or, I mean, just
I just forwarded mine to them.
We've both of us forwarded it to them. So hopefully they'll get on.
Yeah, I would love to have them on. Love to have Clifton.
In my meeting with Jeff Holland, the first thing he said was, call me Jeff. So
there you go.
I was very happy to respond in such a fashion, because when you come in, and state what the mission and purpose is of your meeting, and you're never sure if you want to highball it or lowball it, and when he said, call me Jeff, I just said, well, then I'm Tom. So
there you go. The only people I make call me Rabbi are my parents. They're the only folks I make call me Rabbi. And they were like, well, you're going to make us call you Rabbi? We're your parents, and we're not going to call you by your title. And I was like, all right, Margaret and Gary, be that way. Just kidding.
My wife and kids have to call me Dr. Reese, but everybody else calls me Bob.
Yeah, that's it. Yeah, in our tradition, they call you Reverend Doctor, but I just say, don't make me late for dinner, please.
There
just
you go.
Me.
Well, folks, we're about 8 minutes in. Let's go ahead and I'm going to start this. Welcome to Faith Again. Hopefully we'll have more people come. As I was telling Sam, I never know how many are going to show up. Last time we had 50 for that last discussion. I thought we'd have at least that many for this one. This is because I find
it was like a big deal.
I find Rabbi Sam Spector interesting, and the topic, I think, is something that's very important to me, and I think many of you. So I appreciate you coming once again, and I'm grateful to my wife Jane for her technical assistance with Zoom. She does it a lot for her work. Of course, grateful for Sam for being here, and for Tim Chavez at Faith Matters for letting me borrow his Zoom account. Jana Spangler, of course, normally does it, but she actually meets with clients tonight, so she couldn't make it tonight. So, normally we would have maybe a musical number and then sing at the end. We obviously can't sing at the end. That's a disaster trying to sing on Zoom together. That just doesn't work. So I did, I'm not someone who is anything close to real familiar with Jewish culture. I have the typical Latter-day Saint background in that, but I don't have anything below, soil level in terms of understanding of it. For music though, I did find a piece that I thought was really lovely that was done in Tel Aviv in a live concert. And so I'd like to play that. And then when I talked to Sam because he invited some people from his Kol Ami. Did I say that correct? Kol Ami?
Yeah, Kolami means all my people. I threw it out there. I don't know if they'll show up or not. They hear me talk too much, so.
So anyway, he let people know, and I let people in my ward area know, because Sam's actually a neighbor, lives down the street, Sam and Jill. And I don't see any of my ward members, but they're always a little leery of me anyway, I think, because I'm a little off in the weeds for most of them. So anyway, in terms of an invocation, I said, Sam, is there anybody, from your congregation that you might want to invite? And he offered to lead us in a prayer, which I think is a lovely idea. I would love to be blessed by an ordained rabbi. So we're going to have the piece of music, and then Rabbi Sam Spector will offer, I don't know if he calls it an invocation, but whatever you call that, he'll do it. And we'll be blessed by it. And so we'll go to that point. Here's someone else I need to omit. And then I'm going to try sharing my screen. And then if you will all mute, and hopefully this music will sound okay when it comes to you. And there we are. Thanks for your help. So, Rabbi, I have no idea what they were saying. I hope it was appropriate. You're muted.
There we go. Sorry about that.
Okay.
I couldn't really hear them too well. I'm an auditory learner, but their voices were a little soft next to the guitar, but it sounded lovely. If I saw the lyrics, I could probably tell you at least 80% of what they were saying. That's usually about how much I get it in Hebrews, 70-80%.
Well, do you want to do your
Sure.
invocation or whatever you might call it?
Sure. So, our Latter-day Saints, brothers and sisters, friends, cousins, we don't do spontaneous prayer quite so much, but I do have a blessing here for doing interfaith work and learning from each other. So I'll share that. Blessed is God who creates us buried in many, needing one another. Blessed are our traditions, buried in many, requiring each other. Blessed is our time together. May it provide nourishment for us and for our world. And from Psalms 133, I'll share this. Hine ma tovu manayim shevet achim gam yachad. Behold how good it is when brothers and sisters can sit and dwell together. Well, that, how about we do some learning?
I love that. Thank you. So real quickly, I posted today, I should have done this sooner, but a couple of interviews that were done with Sam. One of them is Mormon Land through the Tribune. And the other one was with Fox 13, a program they have, 3 questions. And that will give you, after we, if you're so interested, a little better background about Sam, besides the biography that's on the website. But Sam's going to talk a little bit about what brought him into becoming a rabbi and why he's so passionate about social justice issues and how that's affecting his congregation. And we're not going to talk a lot about our faith tradition and the persecutions that Latter-day Saints have gone through, because we should, the Latter-day Saints, be fairly familiar with that. Likely less familiar with the Jewish tradition and some of the things that they're continuing to deal with to this day, more than I think Latter-day Saints are. And how all that will segue and interweave with the current Black Lives Matters and the challenges that minorities and people of color and LGBTQ people all struggle with, and how our histories and our faith traditions can inform us, give us greater empathy, compassion, and hopefully capacity and action to help them. And by helping them, we'll obviously help ourselves. So I will be quiet. We'll have a chance for questions too after. And if you have a question during, I'm sure Rabbi Sam will be happy to answer it. But I'm going to turn the time over to Sam now.
Sure, thank you. If you have a question while I'm talking, just put it in the chat right there. That way I won't lose my train of thought. And if I see it's like relevant or I'm going to get that, I'll totally let you know. But that way I won't throw myself off. So yeah, just put in the chat for now. Well, thanks for having me. And you said that y'all aren't going to talk about your own traditions too much, but I'll say that for Jews and Latter-day Saints, something I'm proud of. People all the time brag like, well, Jews have been here about as long as the pioneers. Jews have been here over 160 years. I'm like, okay, but we've been here on earth for 4,000 years. 160 years isn't that big of a deal. But what impresses me more is that obviously, that Latter-day Saints came out here because they were heavily persecuted. I don't know if there's been another faith in our country, aside from the Native American religions, that's been more persecuted by our government than the Latter-day Saints historically. And at a time when Latter-day Saints were being so persecuted, Jews and Latter-day Saints were friends, and Brigham Young worked together. Brigham Young gave space on Temple Square for our very first high holidays here in Utah, and gave us land to build our first synagogue and our first cemetery. And so that's something that I've always been proud of, is that since the beginning we've had great relations with Latter-day Saints, and I think that a lot of that stems really from when we look at our tradition. Judaism was the first monotheistic faith. And so other faiths didn't really pose a challenge to us so much. Before the rise of Christianity historically, there was not a whole lot of anti-Semitism. I mean, there were times when we had wars and got annihilated and stuff like that, but those were more over territorial disputes or something like that, as opposed to religious persecution. And that's because for polytheistic groups, they believed in many gods, and they felt that the God of Israel was just one of their gods. And so it wasn't a challenge. With the rise of Christianity, that's when we started to have conflict and challenge in terms of, if we don't believe what you believe, then our faith negates your faith, and vice versa, which wasn't the case with polytheism. But for us as Jews, where we differ from our Latter-day Saints brothers and sisters is we don't proselytize, and we're what's called so Latter-day Saints and other religions are universal religions that generally kind of lean towards a particularistic God, meaning that there's something for everyone in your faith. That's why you have missionaries, to help people see that no matter who you are, there's something beautiful about Mormon, your life. And the particularistic God component is, and there also are perks, perhaps in afterlife or whatever, by becoming a part of this faith. Judaism's a bit different. It's the opposite. Judaism is a particularistic faith. We don't seek converts. We don't encourage conversion and stuff. But we kind of keep to ourselves. That's why there's more Latter-day Saints today than there are Jews, even though we had about 3,800 year heads. We weren't as good at recruiting. but then there's a belief of universal God, that you can be a part of any faith and receive all the same benefits as Jews do. And so that's going to tie in a bit to what I'm talking about tonight. But, Jay, thank you for having me, was asking about what on earth made me become a rabbi. I every day question myself on that. What were you thinking? I thought that rabbis only work when I see them work. I thought, oh, this guy works a couple hours Friday night, a couple hours Saturday, teaches a class on Sunday, and then the rest of the time he's free. That's an easy job. I'll do that. But a lot of it stems back to my grandparents, and what I'll talk about tonight is with my grandparents. My grandparents, you might be shocked looking at me to find this out, were white people like me, and from the Illinois-Iowa border, a town called Rock Island. And they were not anyone of particular prominence. My grandfather owned a liquor store, and my grandmother was a homemaker, but they were very involved in civil rights. They helped organize rallies for Martin Luther King in their area, and they knew Martin Luther King. And on top of that, my grandmother in the 1940s and 1950s would go to kindergartens in her area and do puppet shows on why segregation was wrong. And that was very much inspired by their Jewish faith and their Jewish values. I think particularly because they came from families. My grandfather came to this country as a 2-year-old from what is today Ukraine, and my grandmother was born recently after her parents had immigrated from the same region.
Robert.
And so they came from families that came to this country due to religious persecution. And I think that seeing other people be persecuted is part of the collective narrative of our people that we talk about at Passover, and we talk about at so many of our holidays, is persecution and how we can't stand idly by. That's in our Torah. Don't stand idly by while your neighbor's blood is shed. And for my grandfather, from the village he came from, was completely destroyed in the Holocaust. All of the inhabitants, Jewish inhabitants of it, for about 2,000 people, were rounded up and shot into a pit in one day, February 12th, 1941, in a village called Brilo. But if you talk to most historians, even Holocaust historians, they've never heard of this, because shooting 2,000 people in one day into a pit is actually a very small massacre compared to the totality of the Holocaust. And so I think that was very much ingrained in us, was we have to speak up when we see others be persecuted, or when we have privileges that others don't. We need to speak out against that. And we need to, we really I think that going to religious school and going to services and all that is like going to practice, and then living your Jewish values and trying to create a better world for others is showing up for the big game. So my grandparents died when my dad was very young. He was 16 when his dad died, and 22, 23 when his mom died. So I never knew them, but their legacy inspired me a lot. And I grew up in Seattle, Washington, and when I was 15 years old or so, 15, 16 years old, there was a bill that came before the Washington State Legislature, the Anderson-Murray bill. And what it said was that you could not fire somebody from their job in Washington State for being LGBTQ, and you could not evict them from their apartment for their sexual, for their sexual orientation or gender identity. And that bill had actually come up the year before, and it had failed by one vote. And so my rabbi talked about getting some congregants together on Martin Luther King Day to go down to the state capitol and lobby legislators about this bill. And I had a day off from school, and I thought about that. And I'm not gay, but going back to my grandparents, I was thinking, well, is that right that I get certain privileges that other people don't get? And so I hopped on the bus with my rabbi, and we went down there and spent the day talking with legislators. And one person said, wait, I'm a devout Christian, and I voted against this bill last year because I felt I couldn't be Christian and support gay rights. But what you're saying is you're people of faith and you support gay rights. And we said, for us, discrimination isn't a part of our faith. And part of our faith is speaking out against discrimination. And so that legislator, he changed his vote. Because he said, I'm against that too, but I just didn't realize you could be Christian and support gay rights. And so, and we showed him out in the first chapter of the Bible, our shared Bible. It says that everyone was created in God's image and likeness. And that bill passed by one vote that year, that one vote. And since then, at least legally, nobody had the Christian right in Washington tried to get that overturned in a referendum, and they did not get enough signatures for the referendum to appear on the ballot. And so since then, at least has been fired or evicted for being part of the LGBTQ community. And so being a part of that change, I realized, wow, as a person of faith, I can help create change. And make the world a holier place. And so that was kind of, if there was one moment that inspired me to be a rabbi, that might have been it. Let me just see, I've made some notes so that I could keep my thoughts organized, because I often don't. So going to, Black Lives Matter, that's been a very controversial thing in my community. And I've been outspokenly in favor of Black Lives Matter. I have Black Lives Matter signs in front of my house. My wife bought, because you can't buy the Black Lives Matter signs individually, so nobody was buying them. And so my wife bought 50 of them and spent hundreds of dollars on them, and then went on the Nextdoor app and told people, hey, they cost $12 a sign. That's what we paid for them. You can Venmo me and come pick one up. And she's distributed hundreds of them. And what led me to support Black Lives Matter was a couple things. One was, this has always been important to me, but where I was like, I can't be quiet anymore was when with the George Floyd murder. And I said, because it wasn't just George Floyd. I started thinking about how many George Floyds have there been? How many George Floyds have I seen on TV? And also seeing peaceful protesters in Washington, D.C. Attacked with horses and tear gas so that our president could get a photo op in front of a church. With that said, let me just take a look at my notes here. So those were the things I decided to get involved with, and a lot of it was assessing my own privilege, because I thought about my interaction with the police. I love the police. Chief Brown, the Salt Lake City Police Department chief, he gave me his cell phone number. And when I first got here, I was getting a lot of threats and stuff. And he told me, call me whenever. And I called him at 7 a.m. one day, and he picked up, said, hey, I'm here helping you out. I have a phenomenal relationship with the police and love the police. And I remember when I was about 4 years old, I grew up in a kind of a wealthy neighborhood in Seattle, predominantly white. And my next door neighbor was friends with a police officer, and the police officer came over to our house, came over to his house to have lunch with his friend. And my mom came in all excited and told me and my little brother, there's a police car out here. Would you like to see the police car? And we ran outside, and the policeman let us in his car, and he turned on the lights and turned on the siren for us. And it was a blast. It was so much fun. And when I lived in Los Angeles, though, part of my seminary experience was that I spent a summer as a chaplain at LA County Hospital. And this hospital is 83% Catholic Latino. A majority of the people there do not have insurance. And many of the patients there are undocumented immigrants. It's also the place where all the incarcerated patients are sent. And so very regularly I was visiting people who were handcuffed to their bed. And so I was thinking about, remember I was visiting a young Hispanic man one day. When I say young, I mean he was like 17 or something. He was a kid. And he was handcuffed to the bed. And he was in the hospital because he'd been bit by a police dog. And I asked him, what happened here? And he said, well, I saw the police and I started running, and they chased me, and their dog was, they let their dog loose, and it bit me. And I asked him, well, what did you do? For them, why did you run? Well, what did you do? And he said, I didn't do anything. And I don't know if that's true or not. From what I gathered from every single incarcerated person that I talked to, there's nobody guilty in the LA County prison system, because everyone was like, I didn't do anything. I'm sure that's not exactly true. But I said, then if you didn't do anything, why did you run? And he said, because my parents taught me as a child that when you see the police, run. And I realized, he came from a community in Los Angeles, a Mexican community in Los Angeles. And if you haven't been to LA, you're lucky, but it's not a great place. But if you haven't been to LA, LA is a very segregated city. There is a Thai neighborhood. There is an Armenian neighborhood. There is a Korean neighborhood where all the billboards are in Korean, and a lot of people don't speak English. Everybody speaks Korean. And there are numerous Mexican neighborhoods, so on and so forth. And he'd grown up in a neighborhood where there was massive distrust of the police. Maybe because his families were undocumented, or something. I don't know. But he was taught, as were many African American people that I talked to, especially in a city with the racial tension and history of Los Angeles, when you see police, run. And that was just so different than what I was taught. My parents taught me, when you see police, run to them. They are your friends. If you are in trouble, they will help you. And in LA, for communities of color, it's often the exact opposite message that's taught. And that was something I had to grapple with. When I was in LA, I also helped pass in California. I worked hard on passing in California a bill for undocumented people that said basically that you could not be deported for a misdemeanor, or if you call the police are not allowed to ask you for your documentation status, because what was happening was, because of this mistrust of the police, there would be women who were beaten up by their boyfriends or husbands or whatever, and they wouldn't call 911 because they were scared they would be deported as the victim. And so, we wanted to pass things, and part of why I did that too was because I love the police and I want to help them do their job. And also I reflected on the most negative experience I've ever had with a police officer. The most negative experience I've ever had was I was driving through the Central Valley of California, and it's flat and farmland. It is not what you think of when California is just flat farmland and cows as far as you can see. And so I thought I was going 70 and I was driving 85. And I got pulled over and got, to date, the only speeding ticket I've ever gotten in my life. And I asked the officer, is there a problem? And he said, you were going 85 and a 70. And I said, officer, I'm so sorry. I didn't realize that. I completely was spacing out. I'm so sorry. And the police officer said to me, well, I have to give you a ticket, but you are such a polite young man. I'm going to write down that you were going 89 instead of 85. So that's going to save you about $300 on your ticket. And I said, thank you, officer. I appreciate that so much. And I apologize again. I will do a better job of driving safely. And he said, thank you. Well, you have a great day. And I said, thank you. Thank you for all you do for our community. And that was the worst experience I've ever had with a police officer. And that tells you something. So going back to the Black Lives Matter issue, I realized that the fact that not everyone has the same relationship with the police that I do, and that's warranted, is a real problem, and means that we need some change. Where I've gotten massive, and I also think about, so there's a couple things I think about with that, then I'll tell you about the pushback I get. So I think that I'm trying to think how I can do that. So and not to compare a police to Nazis, I don't believe at all. So don't hear it this way, but I think about that poem that maybe you have heard about. First they came for the communists, and I did not speak up because I was not a communist. And then they came for the labor unionists, and I didn't speak up because I wasn't a labor unionist. And then they came for the Jews, and I did not speak up because I was not a Jew. And then when they came for me, there was nobody left to speak up. And I think that there's such a Jewish message of speaking up for people who are being persecuted, and not standing idly by, because we've been there while other people have stood idly by. And I think too about the Jewish teaching. There's a teaching about the creation of the first human, and in it, with this teaching, it says that when God created the very first human, God used every single shade of soil from the earth and clay from the earth. And the reason why was so that no group of people could ever say, God loves my people more than yours, because we were created first. And so that always sticks with me. But this just seemed like the right thing to do. Where I've gotten pushback, and there's been a lot of it, is people seeing it, one, well, as political, and two, and I hear that all the time. Don't mix politics in the pulpit. Don't mix politics in the pulpit. Don't mix. Anyways, and but when we look at the Bible is hugely political. It, and when we look at our politics are about morals and values, even like taxes and education and climate change and everything. When you voted, hopefully you did last week, regardless of who you voted for, you probably voted based off of your values and and maybe your religion enforces those values. So I don't think that, so I think that it becomes political when I'm not there saying, hey, here's what the police should be doing, and here's the 10-step program I have to fix this or whatever. But no, it's our job. It's what the prophets did. When you look at the prophets of the Bible, like Jeremiah, Isaiah, folks like that, was they spoke out against injustice and systemic injustice in their communities, perpetuated by their government. And I was talking to a lady about this, and he said, well, you shouldn't talk about politics and really, as a spiritual leader. And so I asked him, I said, well, I hear President Nelson talk about LGBT, like about same-sex marriage, and I hear President Nelson talk about abortion. Why? How about those? And he said to me, well, those aren't political issues. Those are moral issues. And it seems that these things become political when we disagree with them. I hate to break it to you, abortion is a pretty politicized issue, regardless of how you fall on it. But anyhow, where I got pushback to was people said to me, we have a responsibility to take care of our own people first before taking care of others. And that just makes my skin crawl when I hear that. I mean, aside from the fact that that's so anti-Jewish teaching, it's racist. Because what it's saying too is Black people, and there are lots of Black Jews out there. 2% of Israel's population are Jews from Ethiopia. And there are Black people who've converted to Judaism. There's a group of Black Jews from Uganda. And I had a mother who's a congregant of mine who adopted a Black baby who's now a Black 11-year-old boy. And she said, right now, my son is a cute Black boy. Your society will see him as a scary Black man. And I'm terrified for what that will mean for him. If I'm going to stand up for my own, I need to stand up for him. I need to fix this for him because he could be George Floyd. He could be Trayvon Martin. And so this is standing up for our own. But also, like I say, it goes back to that poem of First They Came For. We don't just stand up for for people who look like us or people who are of the same faith as us. But where the struggle with Black Lives Matter, I think also people have struggles with, the police have been so wonderful to our community with all the anti-Semitism we face. They've been so great to us, and are we turning our backs on them by supporting Black Lives Matter? And I think that for a lot of people, they struggle with, people see things as very black and white, excuse the term, but I'm either on this side or that, really in a country that's becoming more and more more, polarized, that's becoming more and more and more the case. If I love President Trump, then how do I support mask wearing? If I love President Trump, or how do I support this or whatever? And so I think that a lot of people feel like if I support Black Lives Matter, then I'm against the police. And I think you can, and this is something the Jewish community has struggled with in other areas too. Since the early 1980s, Israel has no longer fought wars for survival. Israel has fought wars that were tactical. Before 1982, every war that Israel fought was for its own survival. If they lost it, there would be no more Israel. That hasn't been the case since 1982. And I think as those wars have been going on, a lot of Jewish people at times see Israel doing something that doesn't feel right to me. And at the same time, they're pro-Israel and love Israel, and they don't know how to reconcile with that. I think it's the same thing for Black Lives Matter and our great relationship with the police. And so so there's that. But speaking of Israel, this was what really caused the tension with Black Lives Matter. So there is a separate organization from Black Lives Matter called the Movement for Black Lives. It's a different organization. And they released about 4 years ago a charter. And in it, they said one of their missions was to end the genocide of Palestinians, or something like to this effect. Something language that was really, really kind of demonizing of the state of Israel, and was frankly anti-Semitic, because why is that in of an organization that focuses police reform in the United States? Somebody who had a problem with Israel and perhaps a problem with Jews had that put in there, and it created a firestorm. And because the name is so similar, the Movement for Black Lives and Black Lives Matter, a lot of Jews equate those as the same thing when they're not. And Black Lives Matters, the good and the bad of it is that it is a decentralized movement with no firm leadership, that is kind of almost like socialistic, in that anybody is welcome, and and so as a result, we see, and I don't think Black Lives Matter is anti-Semitic, but we see anti-Semitism seeping into Black Lives Matter, and it not being called out, since they do not have a centralized leadership. And that has led to the illusion for a lot of Jewish people that Black Lives Matter is anti-Semitic, and that I'm supporting an anti-Semitic movement. My response to that is, we conversations with Black Lives Matter, people in Black Lives Matter, and with the Black community. But the wrong approach for us is to not, I think the wrong approach is to, turn our backs on the Black community when they need us, and say, you aren't there for us, so we won't be there for you. And so that's, we need to be there, support each other, and build relationships, and then we can have difficult conversations. And particularly in Utah, I think that's where we've had trouble. You maybe have heard the term Utah nice. I think that a lot of folks here don't like confrontation, and I think that there's not to blame your church too much for that, but I think that from what I've observed, Latter-day Saints often aren't as confrontational as other groups of people outside of Utah. And so I think that here, when we're supporting something that's fairly confrontational, it can be uncomfortable for folks. I see a couple questions. I want to take those. At the same time, Jay, you had mentioned to me talking a little bit about anti-Semitism. Do you want me to touch on that and then take questions?
Let's take a question or two and then we can.
Sure. So I see I got a private question of, does each congregation operate independently from other, or advise local rabbis to get involved or stay away from national or local topics? Well, that's a great question. Thank you for that question. We do operate independently. I don't, we don't have a hierarchical structure like Latter-day Saints do. There is no president or anything like that. I come up with my own decisions and interpretations. I have a board of trustees that can fire me or keep me on and determines my salary. But we are each independent of each other. Every year I have to raise $1.5 million to keep the lights on at our synagogue. If I don't, we close. In terms of how that affects us being involved, again, that's our decision, each of our decisions, and also our boards. And I appreciate this question too, because we're Congregation Kol is affiliated with both the Reform and conservative movements of Judaism. And that makes us kind of rare. And in the conservative movement, their rabbis are trained very much on Jewish law. And that is the focus of their seminary education, is understanding of Jewish law. And they're taught that you should teach about Jewish law when you give a sermon. In the Reform movement, which is the movement where I came out of, it's not as concerned with that, but rather the focus is the voice of the prophets and how today we need to carry the prophetic vision of social justice within us, and that what's appropriate for our rabbinate is social justice in creating a world that reflects our Jewish values. And so from my more conservative, and that doesn't mean politically, I mean religiously, members, I do get pushback because they say a rabbi isn't supposed to talk about these things, whereas from the Reform movement, they say this is absolutely what a rabbi is supposed to talk about. Nobody really cares today if you're supposed to put on your tefillin or your talit first, or which order you're out. What do American Jews think about President Trump's support of Israel? For instance, his moving of the U.S. Embassy to Jerusalem. He said that if they don't support his policies, they are disloyal. How many congregations are there in Utah, and are they formed geographically? Got a few questions there in one question. So I'll take the latter part of that first. In Utah, we have a very tiny congregation up in Ogden that has about 30 families. There's a congregation also in Park City that's a Reformed congregation that's slightly smaller than ours. A lot of their members are seasonal folks, and then there's folks like Ellen who go there too, who live here year round. Our congregation, and then there's our congregation, which is, like I said, affiliated with Reform and conservative movements, and we're the largest synagogue in Utah. And pretty much everybody here is year round. And there's also what's called Chabad, which is an Orthodox movement. They don't really have a synagogue; they operate differently, but they have some stuff in Salt Lake City, Park City, and St. George. So for us, it doesn't work like it does for you all with wards being geographically placed. Like, we just set up community where we choose, and people can join them or not join them. When I live in LA, people before the Jewish holidays would do synagogue shopping, where every summer, they would visit 5 different synagogues in a month, listen to the rabbi speak, and decide which one they liked best. So you can go wherever you want. So about American Jews in Israel, it's so divided. Some thought this was the greatest thing ever. Some thought that this was the worst thing ever. 70 to 80% of Jews vote Democrat in America. Both Joe Biden and Hillary Clinton each got over 70% of the Jewish vote. in America. Among Orthodox Jews, most vote for Donald Trump, but he got about 68% of the Orthodox vote. That they make up 10% of American Jews. So, I mean, in terms of Donald Trump's support for Israel, I think that the recent peace deals he's made between Israel, the UAE, Bahrain, Sudan have been, widely applauded and seen as wonderful. With decisions about the embassy and stuff, that's more controversial. Some think that this was wonderful, and some think it's with the Palestinians. In terms of our loyalty, we're Americans. I think Donald Trump has forgotten that, because regularly his administration has told me and told other rabbis, oh, we love your country. And I'm like, I'm an American. I hope you love my country because you're the president of my country. I mean, I'll talk about that with the anti-Semitism, this idea of loyalty and stuff. Are there current events? Yeah.
Just real quick on that same point, you suggested we read Barry Weiss. Is that Weiss or Weiss?
Barry Weiss. Yeah, Barry Weiss.
One of the things I heard in that interview that I posted, she said, as you just did, there were things that she appreciated that President Trump did, but none of those things were worth the divisiveness that he created in this country.
Yeah.
I thought that was really powerful, that even though that was helpful, it wasn't worth what he's created in division in America.
So I'll say this, now that the election is over, your church very thoughtfully set up a private meeting with me and National Security Advisor Robert O'Brien, who is the highest ranking Latter-day Saint in the church, in the administration rather. And fun fact, I have great relations with the church. After that meeting, I do not have great relations with Robert O'Brien. It did not go well. We basically almost got in a shouting match with each other. Because there was an idea, Robert O'Brien came in basically pandering to me and saying like, oh, you should love Donald Trump because of what he's done for Israel. And I'm like, but I live in America, and when you are blowing dog whistles to white supremacists, that puts me in danger. That puts my life in danger. Kudos for everything you've done for Israel. That makes no difference to me in Salt Lake City, Utah. I'll talk more about that later. Yeah. So he hates me. Anyways, and he told the governor he hates me. So anyhow, that's okay. I hate him too. In current events, we don't currently have anything planned, but one of the things we did for Yom Kippur this year is I gave my Yom Kippur sermon on the Black Lives Matter movement and why we should be supporting it, and which cost me some donations. I had as a guest speaker that day Dr. Bruce Haynes, who's a professor at UC Davis, focusing on African American history and Jewish history. And one of the things he said when somebody asked him, what can we do? Is he said something very powerful to me, to us. He said that Black folks are tired of having the conversation to appease white guilt. Every time that a Trayvon Martin happens, a Eric Garland happens, a Rodney King happens, a George Floyd happens, white people are rushing to talk to Black churches and saying, how can we help? Educate us, tell us what we can do, educate us on this and know that we stand with you. And then we don't do anything until it happens again. And then we ask for the same conversation to appease our white guilt. And I think there's some truth to that. And so what he talked about is, if you have people in your community who can lend their services and help, like lawyers or whomever, that's great if they can lend legal services, but also things that helping Black folks build equality and equity in this country is a key to fixing this stuff. So for instance, I'm in my first home that I've ever owned, and I had no idea that owning a home is such a pain. Every week something breaks and it costs money. And well, no vacation this winter because I got to pay $4,000 because my fence blew down in the hurricane, because I didn't know we had hurricanes in Utah. And there's stuff like that.
Sam lives in an old polygamous pioneer home built in the late 1800s. So
that used to be the home of Porter Rockwell. So yes, a lot of history here. With that said, you know, I go into my savings and I pay $4,000 to fix my fence. For a lot of Black, white people too, but particularly for communities of color, paying $4,000 to fix your fence is not an option. And it doesn't mean missing a vacation or a ski day. It means possibly not paying your mortgage. And so are there people in our communities who are handymen who can help with stuff like that? That's what they need, is what was told to me. So we got a comment here. Many police are supportive of Black Lives Matter, or at least the need of fair policing. I agree with you. It's false dichotomy. That's why I keep trying to tell people. I had congregants who were saying me, like, frankly, offensive things, being like, well, what do you think about these 2 police officers that were ambushed in LA and shot? And I'm like, I think it's horrible. What do you think I think about that? I think that we do have a lot of false dichotomies. So let's see. Were there any other questions? Could you say something about Tikkun Olam? So Tikkun Olam, that means repairing the world. Really, I think, again, Reform Judaism has a real focus on Tikkun Olam. I mean, not saying that other movements don't, but I think other movements of Judaism, like Orthodoxy and conservative Judaism, have are more roundly, are able to be much more broad on religion, on study, on worship, and do so many different things. And in Reform Judaism, I think there's a much more narrow focus on repairing the world and being civil rights leaders and doing social justice, which, by the way, is why I think have 80-something% of Reform Jews voting more Democrat, and 68% of Orthodox Jews voting Republican. I think that there are, in Latter-day Saints, I don't know if this, I get the impression that's not the case for this group, but Latter-day Saints are a much more conservative politically faith. And so I think that when you have more focus on faith and dogma and religious practice, you do lean conservatively. We see this in Israel too. And when you are more focused on social justice and stuff like that as your core focus, then you're going to be probably leaning more liberal. I was asked to speak a little bit about anti-Semitism. When I was in college, I remember a super woke, far left-wing guy told me that anti-Semitism isn't a thing anymore. And it's just not the truth. I'm actually politically, I know tonight I'm sounding super liberal because I'm talking about an issue that more liberals align with, that I align with, but I'm actually a fairly centrist person politically. I vote Republican and Democrat. I think that a lot of people think that anti-Semitism doesn't exist. And the reason for that, I'll acknowledge, is my own privilege. Like right now I'm wearing a kippah, I'm Rabbi Spector, but if I take this off, I look a lot more like Elder Spector. I can mask my identity very well. But I think that a lot of it is over a question of whiteness. I'll talk about that in one moment, but we do see that anti-Semitism is a very real thing in our country, and that it's on the rise in recent years. Uh, I mean, even though I grew up in liberal Seattle, there was a time I got punched in the face at school and was called a dirt happened. And when I was 17, 18 years old, Israel was at war with Lebanon, and a guy walked into the Jewish Federation building of Greater Seattle, and he shouted, "I hate Israel," and he shot 6 people there. And um, in college, I remember walking through college campus wearing my yarmulke and my kippah, and a guy got up in my face and shouted, "Get the hell out of Palestine!" And I'm like, "I'm in California. What are you talking about?" And I think today it's not politically correct to say I hate Jews. And I mean, you still hear a lot of things about how Jews control the media and stuff like that. But it's not politically correct to say I hate Jews. And so people say things more like, well, I hate Israel. Kind of going back to that. I'm not saying Israel's above criticism. It's not. But going back to that movement for Black lives, why was it that the whole thing was focused on police reform, and then there was an attack on Israel? I mean, sure, Israel has its problems, but Israel's the one country you're going to mention in there. You're not going to talk about horrific human rights abuses in other countries, as and stuff. And there's a singling out, a demonization, a delegitimization, and double standards that are applied to Israel being the only Jewish state. And so we see that some, but under President Trump's presidency, we have unfortunately seen the attack in Pittsburgh, which was the worst anti-Semitic attack in our nation's history, and also other attacks as well. And we have seen the highest level of hate crimes against Jews reported since they started recording in the 1960s, 1970s. And Jews, believe it or not, even though we make up 2% of the United States, we are 58% of reported hate crime victims for religious-based persecution in our country, more than Muslims, more than anybody else, by a long shot, 58%. And my last synagogue in Los Angeles, it looked like a fortress. We spent $300,000 a year on security. And I used to ask myself when I would drive past the Catholic church down the street that had no security, what could we do if we didn't have to spend this on that? And I think that like I said, the growing anti-Semitism, and this is something Barry Weiss talks about some in her book, is due to the question of whiteness. Because we're seeing growing anti-Semitism on both the far left and the far right. For those on the far right, like the Poway shooter, for instance, in Poway, California, Jews are, this is very much kind of like a Nazi rhetoric of Jews are an inferior race, but they look like me, as white people, and we are infiltrating and marrying pure white people and breeding with them and tainting their pure white DNA. That's what you're hearing on the far right, and the Nazism in our country that's on the rise. From the far left, what you're hearing, it's also a question of whiteness, but it's the opposite. Whereas the far right sees us as not white and we're infiltrating white people, the far left sees us as the opposite. They see us as the Jared Kushners. They see us as the Stephen Millers. They see us as the Steve Mnuchins, as the Michael Cohens, all these folks, Trump surrounds, who are Jewish. And they say, Jews are white people. They've become part of the establishment, and they are the oppressors. And that's when you're hearing anti-Semitic tropes from folks like Ilhan Omar, who say, Jews are, why does America support Israel? Somebody asked her, and she said, it's all, because of APAC, the American Israel Public Affairs Committee. And people were like, what do you mean by that? And she said, it's all about the Benjamins, say about money, and repeating an anti-Semitic trope of basically Jews control the government and American foreign policy. So, yeah. Let's see, a reference to white guilt. Sensitive whites see their own white privilege and want to rebalance during these BLM times. Perhaps. I think it's a lot about white fragility. I guess the difference is, yeah, there's subgroups, like there's Irish Americans, there's Italian Americans, so on and so forth. I don't think there's really a white culture in the way that there is for like Black. Yeah. Extremism rather than the unique. Should we be speaking against extremism rather than the uniqueness of any single group? That's a great question. I think we need to denounce all forms of bigotry and oppression. And at the same time, though, when we see that there is a group in trouble, we need to speak out for them in particular. It goes back to that question about all lives matter versus Black Lives Matter. Well, of course, all lives matter, but not everybody is, facing the same circumstance. Analogy is, if my house is on fire, hearing, and somebody says go, and somebody goes, well, all houses matter. Yeah, but my house is burning to the ground right now, save my house. And so I think that's where the Black Lives Matter issue comes in, is these are folks who are in dire strait, who are being killed for being Black. And we're seeing this, by the way, with disproportional COVID deaths as well. And we need to do something about it, because whereas anti-Semitism is bad and it is a problem and we need to call it out, I'm able to take off my kippah or put on a baseball cap, and I'm able to walk down the street and not be afraid for my life.
Those are good questions, good comments. All of you can, you can actually speak if you'd like. You don't have to just
I have something to say.
type in your questions. You're
Sure.
welcome to ask a question or share an insight that you've experienced.
I wouldn't mind saying something.
Yes, John.
Kind of a question and a comment. Thanks. I've long supported, since not long, but since I had a roommate who was actually Canadian but Jamaican by descent. So very, very dark person, or Black person, I guess. But he educated me, and I was a student at BYU at the time, and as well as he was. And he educated me. He told me about experiences he would have on campus about people just being extra careful around him. And this is probably well known around this group, but just kind of what he referred to as mad Black man syndrome. Just, oh, they're Black, like they're going to be mad at me. And I'm wondering, like, how much that might have to do, and maybe it's not the systemic problem with these people being stopped by police and whatever that are Black or driving while Black, or whatever. That it's not a conscious thing, perhaps, by the police. You talked about your experiences, Rabbi, with the police being very positive, and I'm wondering if those very same police maybe are the experiences they act maybe
Sure.
not differently, and not necessarily like this conscious.
Yeah, no, that's a great point, John. I think we all have our implicit biases. I was thrilled that Governor Herbert is now requiring implicit bias training for police officers. We do. I won't act like I don't. For me, it's actually white people with shaved heads I get very nervous around. But when I see somebody walking past my house or whatever, but I think we do have our implicit biases and that we learn. And everybody in my family, I guess, owned liquor stores. You could tell we were not Latter-day Saints. And one of my dad's cousins, he was horrifically racist against Black people. And the reason why was because he owned a liquor store, and he was on numerous occasions held up and robbed, and it was very often by Black people. And so I understand that. And after I gave my Black Lives Matter sermon, I got a very vulnerable letter from one of my congregants telling me basically that he is racist and admitting that he's racist and saying, here's why I'm racist. Here are the experiences I've had with Black people that you probably never have had. And he detailed horrible, horrible experiences from his childhood that he had growing up in a predominantly Black neighborhood. I think the question, so I don't deny those or try and demonize those people. I think that, and on the other side of my family, by the way, my mom is from Alabama, and my grandfather on that side was very, very racist. And I don't think he was necessarily a bad man, but he grew up in the 1920s in Alabama and was a product of that. I think that part of the issue, though, of why perhaps Black people are seen as threats goes back to that. My grandfather, he served in World War II, and when he came back, he started building equity for our family and sent my mom to college and all these things. And he was building equity, but when Black people who came back from World War II, they were trying to build equality. They couldn't build equity in Alabama. And they couldn't send their kids to the same school my mom went to. My mom went to a segregated school, and so, which was better. And so I think that's part of the thing, going back to kind of like what Bruce Haynes was saying, is that over time, perhaps, if we can help people of color build equality, which, by the way, might mean us losing some of our privilege. Like he cited examples of people who chose not to send their kids to private school, but to send them to inner city public schools so they could have the same education as Black kids and get to know Black kids. And if we can, give up some of our things to make sure are getting the same privilege that we are, whether it's women being paid equally in the workplace or whatever, if I'm giving up some of my salary to make sure that my colleague is being paid the same rate I am, we can, over time, perhaps build that equality and tear down those biases.
Anybody else have something to share in the last few minutes we have? Mary Kay, are you leaning forward to say that?
Yeah, I was just going to say, I appreciated in the readings that we had. I didn't have a chance to actually read the book, but just reading about the book, the idea that it's not enough to not be racist, but the effort to become anti-racist and the difference between the two. I thought it was very meaningful, and it brought to mind an opportunity I had just on Saturday to be anti-racist, but I hadn't yet read this. I was less focused. So I had gone, I live in Maryland. And so
right over there.
Yeah. So on Saturday, when the race was called for Biden, I just felt like, okay, I have to be down there and be part of that celebration. So I drove down and had a great time with all these very happy people. It was just a lovely experience. Well, when I got home, an older friend of mine called to make sure I was all right, because she had known I was going. And she said, "Oh, I was just so worried about you. I heard there was a lot of people drinking alcohol and all these Black people." And like that was somehow in her mind that equated that it was a dangerous situation. And I should have called her out on it, instead of just saying, "Oh no, it's fine. It was a lot of just happy people. It was a good experience. I was grateful to be there." Okay. But I should have been more specific and say, maybe, now what in your mind, why would you make that association? And can we talk a little bit about that? Because it's an incorrect assumption that somehow the fact that there might be a large number of African-American people present, that it somehow would be more dangerous. I mean, I just didn't feel like that was a reasonable thing to say. And I'm now sorry that I didn't,
That's all right. I
you know,
mean,
express it more clearly. But I think that we do have opportunities to be more than not being racist, but to actually be proactively
yeah,
speaking up.
that book, How to Be an Anti-Racist, is a great book. I mean, that's what I based a lot of my sermon off of. I mean, we've heard a lot of Donald Trump when he announced his run for president. In his Mexicans are rapists, you know, they steal, they all, like he said, horrifically terrible things. And he also said that a Mexican American judge was not qualified to judge a case of his because of his heritage. And he called for a Muslim ban. Robert O'Brien insists that he didn't, and got in a big argument with me about it, but he did. Donald Trump has said so many racist things, but Donald Trump says, I am the least racist person you've ever met. And so that's something we have to think about is, if I say, well, I'm not racist, and that's something I've said a ton, I'm not racist, I'm putting myself on that same level. And I'm also like, I'm not a Latter-day Saint. That doesn't really tell you anything about who I am. I'm not a Muslim. I'm not a Catholic. I'm not, but if I tell you I'm Jewish, that does tell you something about who I am. And so similarly, when we say I'm not racist, okay, that tells you what you're not. It doesn't tell you anything about what you are. And saying I'm an anti-racist and I'm going to support anti-racist policies, politicians, and do anti-racist acts. That's what helps end racism.
Good comment. Thank you. Few minutes for anybody else real quick?
Father Tom has something.
Yes,
Father
Father.
Tom, go for it.
Hi, Rabbi. I'm from Seattle, Tacoma as well. And when we were going through our PhD programs up there, we would go get our Hebrew references from Temple de Hirsch.
Oh, sure.
Up on Broadway in Seattle. And
I know Temple de Hirsch.
Yeah, so we'd buy our Tanakhs and everything like that. And it was a great time in the bookstore that they had at the time. When I went back east many years ago to tour a lot of our Eastern churches that were Black churches in Washington, D.C., Baltimore, and I got to know the clergy real well. We had a lot of potlucks together, shared worship. And of course, we talked about the political and economic divides in America. And one of the things that I've heard radical Black leaders say, like Abernathy and many others, is, and when I asked these people up close whether or not this was true, they said, we wanted the white aristocracy to stop telling us what we need, even through liberal social policy that comes from a lot of academics, people who are not on the ground living with us, and yet they are telling us what we should do to improve our lot in this country, as opposed to helping them work with the rest of America on self-determination and to be who they want to be, and to give the cultural import into America that they themselves want to contribute. If you had similar discussions.
You're talking about Black people?
Yes.
Yeah. So yeah, that was something that I reflected on. I wrote about it in my sermon. Some was I remember I went to a very affluent private high school in Seattle, and basically it was all white millionaire kids in every single grade. There were 2 or 3 African-American students who were there mostly on scholarship. And yet the school would plaster them all over their promotional material and stuff to show how diverse they were. And I remember all the Black kids sat together at lunch. And I remember once I felt, oh, that's wrong. That's weird. I'm going to go sit with them. And so I sat down with them, and they basically all stopped talking, looked at me and said, "You're at the wrong table. You better get up and leave." I thought that was racist against me. And I remember also getting in an argument with a teacher when she basically said that Black people could say the N-word and white people couldn't. And I was like, nobody should say that. If they want to be treated like us, if they want equality, then they should act like everybody else. In hindsight, I didn't think about why there is a difference. And I didn't think about why, what I was saying to her, I wasn't looking to understand. I remember walking away from that lunch table and saying, well, they should do this if they want. I was making an effort and they rejected me. They should have accepted me if they, if they're talking about how everybody else is racist. And I remember telling my teacher, like I said, essentially what I told my teacher was, if Black people acted more like I did, then they would be equal. And stuff down the road. And so I think that is something that, again, comes through us, people of privilege saying, be more like us and you won't be discriminated against. And this is, by the way, relating back to my own people, this is why so many Jews change their names or change the way they dress or change their appearance, was saying, I wonder what, if we act more like, other folks do, instead of those who are privileged, saying maybe we can accept people's differences and recognize those and treat them equally, even if we behave differently. And if we have different narratives and backgrounds. So that's where, so that was my experience with that. And that's something I now try and guard myself against, is asserting my privilege by saying, act more like me, and then maybe you can have as good of a life as I do.
Well, folks,
I came back a very different person through letting them tell me about what their experiences meant, rather than me trying to interpret it, through my lens. And I've never forgotten, those experiences at all. And it developed deep relationship with the clergy back there. And because in my own life as a physically challenged person, I definitely always felt like I was a throwaway person, but for very different reasons. And so we could kind of come together on those issues, but I had to come away with the idea, I've never had the Black experience, nor ever would I be able to totally understand it the way they do.
Thank you.
Thank you, Rabbi.
thank you, Father Tom. Thank you to all of you.
Hey, Gee, I've got something.
Real quick, because we're running late.
No, are we? Okay, 2 points real fast. I've been reflecting more on this attitude of abundance versus scarcity. And people tend to have a view that if some minority group has a thing and I'm superior to them, therefore I can't have the thing because they have it. People tend to think very mathematically. But I've been enlarging my view to think if someone else has something, whether it's a tangible thing or an intangible, then, and I'm part of their community, I benefit from them having it. you know, if there's a job and a black person has that job, then how am I not better for them to have it, or any minority? So I think we need to have a more of an abundance mentality rather than the scarcity mentality where, gosh, if someone else has something, tangible or not, then I cannot therefore have it. My second point has to do with something that Mary Kay said about her election night. And, you know, candidly speaking, roughly half of my candidates won and half didn't. And during the announcements of that evening of who won, my propensity was to drive to the nearest gathering party that was among people who won that I didn't vote for, so that I could learn from them and say, okay, this is going to be my candidate for the next 2, 4, 6, 8 years. I need to learn more about the candidate that I didn't vote for. I already know about the ones I vote for. My time is limited. I'm not going to spend it at their watch party. I'm going to go to the after party for those that I did not learn about, that I did not vote for, so I can become acquainted with their issues, their strengths, and put my momentum in the winner, because that is my representative for the next period. Any comments there?
I like it. I like it. Those are good comments. Thank you, Stephen. And again, thanks to all of you, particularly Sam. Thank you so much for taking time. Sam doesn't have a lot of time. I know in the beginning he talked about he was thinking being a rabbi was going to be a cushy job. Found out it consumes morning till late at night.
Got a couple more hours of work tonight. This was a nice break for me.
He's been very generous to share his precious time with us, and so is thank your wife Jill too for sharing, and your dogs.
And my dogs, and they
appreciate it very much.
Thank you, everybody. This has been a joy.
It's been good. So we usually close out with a prayer. Mary Kay, would you mind offering that for us? Thank you.
Our Father who art in heaven, we're so grateful that we've had the blessing of being together and to have been taught and to learn from each other. We pray for thy blessings to be with each of us, that we will feel moved to greater kindness and understanding and a desire to serve those about us and to seek to know thy will. We are grateful for the opportunity to live in this country, and we pray that there will be peace and opportunity, and that we will be able to move forward in a more unified manner. We are very grateful for the diversity that exists of religious belief within our land, and pray that we will seek to extend to others the privileges we hope to have for ourselves. And again, we're so grateful to thee for all of thy blessings, and say this in the name of Jesus Christ. Amen.
Amen. Thanks again, everyone. It's been good to be with you.
Thank you.
Take care. See you next time.
Good night.
Bye-bye.
Jay, I put a couple of questions in the chat. Have any follow-up with the rabbi and can address some of those? That would be fun.
Okay. I'm pretty sure you'd be welcome. I know there's several people that do go to Jewish synagogue that are active LDS. So
I wondered also about his Black Lives Matter sermon. It would be.
I'll ask him about that. See if I can post a
copy of that.
Yeah, see if I can post it on the website. That's a good suggestion. Thank you.
Jay, if he needs an easier job, he can become a father.
Is that easier?
I'm just kidding.
Well, since our group is small now, what does a rabbi do? Is it a sense of home teaching, visiting teaching, ministering? Does it have a kind of LDS look and feel to it?
I can't answer that.
Well, it's very close in the rabbinates. They give Torah studies often on Sunday, and then they actually have Hebrew class, and just like we would, in the Catholic or LDS tradition. But of course, it's in the Tanakh. A lot of their emphasis and Jewish law, the Mishnah, the oral law, and so and it's very philosophical and reaching the world, because you don't have the specifics of the resurrection and the olam, the world to come. That's all left up to God. So they don't have the salvational dogmatics put on scriptures the way we do from the New Testament.
Right, but they're still preparing lessons for the Sabbath.
Yes.
They're still making home visits,
Yes.
trips to the bishop's storehouse or their equivalent to bring food to widows and orphans, and
very much so. Very much the things you would do or I would do. Yeah. Very much.
So currently, Stephen, his congregation is co-supporting our ward's yearly humanitarian effort, and that's to help the homeless. So our two congregations are working together on that. And I know, they just finished the high holidays. That was through October, because I was going to have him do it in October, but he just was from morning till night with all the holidays that are all crammed basically into 1 month, which I didn't know anything about. And I still know a lot about, but
The Feast of Tabernacles.
yeah, he's super busy managing all those. And now he said, now I'm trying to catch up in my ministering, with my congregation from having to do all those other things during the high holidays.
when was that, Jay? September?
Through October, kind of
Okay.
last of September and through October. Maybe Father Tom knows better. Again, this is all kind of new
Yeah,
stuff.
there's the Day of Atonement and Yom Teruah, the Feast of Trumpets. And there's a wonderful crossover at the end of the Feast of Tabernacles, where Yahweh is supposed to be enthroned on the last great day during the New Year's festival. That would tie into the temple motifs of the LDS Church, where the New Year's festival results in man becoming God. And it ties into the Roman Catholic parts of theosis, where we all become divine in God's presence. So there's a real wonderful intersection there of the last great day.
That's cool.
Thank you, Tom.
Yeah.
Well,
Anybody have anything else, or are we?
I was just going to say, it's lovely to go to a Shabbat service if you haven't done that. And it just to experience it, I don't know, just to feel like, to understand we're not really so different. I mean, there's a lot that is different, of course, but to just the spirit is similar, right? So
Mary Kay, did you go?
yeah. So and luckily I sat next to somebody who kind of coached me on, well, because a lot of course was in Hebrew and I didn't understand what was being said, and so she would tell me what was being said and help me find where the readings were, and I was doing my best to try to follow, which was a little bit challenging, but it was a very positive experience. And then Jay, you might appreciate this, that I was actually invited specifically to a service that was in honor of trees. A Shabbat service. They knew I was a local environmentalist that helped get trees out into the community. So I was invited as a guest. And after the service, they had a wonderful zero waste luncheon. So it was all vegetarian, and everything, the plates and the utensils, everything was compostable, even the bags that they gathered everything, any surplus in. And all the extra food was arranged in advance to be taken to people who needed it. So when the event was over, which was equivalent to a ward dinner, there was not a scrap of waste.
Wow.
Nothing went to the garbage. And I thought, what a contrast, how we could learn. And they asked me, in fact, that's why we now in our ward have a green team, because they said, could our green team work with your green team? And I said, well, you could if we had one. Let me talk to our bishop and see if we can get a green team, and then maybe we can do something together.
Okay, in Judges chapter 9, you have the festival of the trees.
Yeah.
In the Old Testament, and it's people talking to trees, and we read that as Christians and say, what the heck is that, you know? But in Jewish metaphor, it's creation answering God's people. It's creation answering Yahweh. And that's how they will read that. Judges chapter 9, the festival of the trees comes after the Feast of Tabernacles.
I love that. That's beautiful. Both those things that you, with the green team, man, we need to have that as an auxiliary throughout the church, every ward. That's a great.
I mean, it was great because I contacted my bishop and he was like, sure, that sounds like a good idea. And we made a list of things that we could do. And
Jay, why don't we have a discussion on where faiths doctrinally intersect? And I think if people knew that from a scholarly background, they would absolutely be floored. Because there are common intersections that are almost never talked about, like the threeness of God in the Desert Fathers and Orthodox theology. And we know the LDS talk about threeness and Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. And what's never talked about is there is a way to talk about the Godhead from the Desert Fathers in threeness. And it would help our Trinitarian friends understand different points of view.
That would be fun.
You can just go on and on and on with these intersections.
I love that. I think it testifies of a singular God that loves all of his children.
Amen.
Dan's got a comment.
Thanks, Dan.
Oh, here, question for Mary Kay. What's protocol for an outsider to attend a Jewish service? Do you wear the headdress, the standing, the sitting, the singing?
I suppose it would
outsider?
depend on whether it was Orthodox or conservative or,
What did you do?
there's different, but you could always ask, like in advance of, in this case, I was invited. So I knew it would be all right because
So you're covering your head in all the ways that they would?
So I would do, like I have been to also to mosques and, wear long sleeve and a scarf and pray. And, and it's an interesting thing to experience their prayers. You get a lot of exercise.
They're so different than the Catholic prayers.
Yeah. But it was very interesting because until I actually did it myself, it felt very foreign. But then actually being there and learning like what the words meant, it was a prayer I could say from my heart and fully mean it, which I hadn't realized that would be the case.
Nice.
Well, but
they used to just let us go, as clergy as we are.
Yeah. Stephen, right now, it's easy. You just Zoom. I mean, his congregation is via Zoom. So if you go on their website, Colony, you could probably participate that way.
Just Zoom in.
Okay.
Yeah. And people wear their head hats at home?
I have no idea. Some of them probably do. I mean, again, he says this congregation is a combination of Reform.
There's an intersection there with Catholicism that's the yarmulke is the enlightening of the mind, like the sun would pierce the head and bring illumination.
Well, why don't they have a magnifying glass on their little yarmulke then? Let that sunlight in. He's a neat guy. Thank you.
Tonight.
Thank you.
as it's 2 hours later here, I think
I know, you've got to be exhausted.
Mary Kay, one more question about your Jewish experience. Did they ask you to do a recitation, a reading, a citation?
No, I was just there as a guest. They had, it was very interesting. They had a special guest rabbi who, fortunately, although much of what she said was in Hebrew, she also would then explain in English what she was saying in Hebrew, so I could follow that part. And so I just, it was just a very interesting experience, and I have more affection for my Jewish neighbors now from having shared service. Now,
what they're reading out of is the Siddur. And so it's like a liturgical book of prayer, except it's following the Old Testament reading.
Yeah.
Since the rabbi did not know you were not Jewish, Mary Kay, and since the rabbi was herself a visitor, the rabbi could have asked you to do a reading unwittingly, and I guess you'd say, well, I'm not a member, but I'll.
If that had happened, the one thing that I have found, I visited a lot of different faith groups, and I've never yet been made to feel uncomfortable somewhere. So generally people, like in this case, the person who sat next to me showed me the book and how we were reading not left to right, but right to left, and where to kind of follow along. And so even though it was in Hebrew, I kind of was getting a little bit of a sense, and though it was just very, I don't know, it's lovely, just very lovely. Even if I wasn't completely understanding what was happening, it was just a nice feeling about it. And so I think even if you were somewhere and seemed to be put on the spot because they thought you would know what to do, you could just say, I'm a visitor. Could tell me what I need to do, or maybe someone else could do it for me.
Sure,
like people are generally happy to have you visit.
Pray for the gift of tongues.
Yeah, but in the analogy, like the men wear their yarmulke, and if I'm a visitor, I may want to participate and wear one.
Yeah, they would have a basket.
If they find out mid-meeting,
they would have a basket of them right there for you, one to use.
Well, you're making my point for me. But as a non-Jewish person, they may find out mid-meeting I'm not a Jew and say, hey, take that off. Like, take those temple garments off, non-Mormon. It could be an allegory of that.
Yes, but they'd be happy to have you wear one to cover your head because it's showing respect to their practice.
But you see my point.
Yes.
Some articles,
when in doubt, just always ask. When you're in doubt about it, just ask.
One of the things that they don't like is non-Jews trying to be Jews. Yeah. They find that very offensive. Like with the Christians, who play it being Jews, but then they have a Christian ideology. I've ministered in many of those Hebrew roots congregations, and a lot of the Jews say, well, that should come out of Judaism to find the Messiah. It should not come out of the church. And so we see white people wearing, or non-Jews wearing talits and seats and claiming to be rabbis and things like that. Very offensive, to a Jew.
Right, but that's different than just visiting and trying
to do. Of course, I'm just making a differentiation, but really what the rabbis have told us is just come as you are and be who you are.
Yeah.
Tom, that's good to know, because Stephen, we got to call this. Sorry, it's 2 hours later for Mary Kay right now.
Good night.
Okay, Mary Kay, you take care now.
Such a pleasure to be with you guys and to have our own little chat afterwards. Thank you. You guys
very meaningful, Jay. It truly is, because so few people are interested in these types of discussions today, and we need them.
We do need them. And they happen because you guys are willing to attend. So thank you for being willing to attend and participate, and for your good questions and thoughts.
Let's see, Tom, where are you? Are you in Salt Lake, Ogden, Provo?
I'm up here in Idaho.
Oh, Idaho. Okay, wonderful.
Yeah. Yeah, the land of the potatoes. but we're still in the LDS belt, though, you know.
Okay.
Well,
Well,
good night, you
people are
guys.
shocked when they find out that there's LDS Catholic churches. That's another untold story out of the old Catholic movement.
Sum that up in one sentence, Tom.
How about-
LDS Catholic.
How about you
churches.
guys, I'm going to need to end this because it's still recording. You guys can connect. How's that?
I'll be glad
connect
to.
you via email. And then you
Okay.
guys can continue.
Okay.
All right. Good night, you
Thank
guys.
you. God bless.
Love you
Well,
guys.
you know, brother, how that works, there's an apostolic independent group of Catholics in the old Catholic movement that accept the Book of Mormon in their readings. So they'll have Old Testament, New Testament readings. They'll look just like I do, and then they'll read the Book of Mormon, Moroni, after they do the New Testament. And one of our priests came into the LDS church just like I did. So we both have kept our holy orders out of that tradition.
Would that only happen in the Wasatch Front Belt?
I'm gonna, he's not gonna,
No.
Okay, let's sign
all
off.
right, I gotta
All right,
call
well,
it, you guys.
Yeah, you're
Good
the
night.
gatekeeper of this meeting, right?
Take care.
okay. Yeah, they're all over the country, those churches.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.